And here's what open source does. And it gives you that feedback. It gives you that experience. It made me for sure a better developer, because you got to think not just about like, okay, here is this thing that I'm making and it's kind of a black box. It's just for me. Maybe someone's going to open it in 3 years from now, but hey, that's 3 years from now. Who cares?
Hello everyone, my name is Maciej Novack and welcome to the Awesome to Know podcast, where we discuss all things WordPress. And this episode is different from previous ones because today we have not one but two guests. We will be talking about an open source library called Timber with Jared Novack, founder of Upstatement Agency, and Lukas Gächter, a very prominent contributor to Timber. And we will discuss a range of topics, from why would you even start contributing to an open source project to what you can learn from the process, and also many other things. If you don't want to miss new episodes and keep learning about WordPress, subscribe to Awesome to Know newsletter at awesomestudio.com/newsletter. This is osomstudio.com/newsletter. If you watch this on YouTube, give us a thumb and subscribe to the channel. This means a lot to us. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Jared and Lukas.
Hey everyone, it's good to have you here. We're glad you decided to tune in for this episode of the Awesome to Know podcast.
Hello, gentlemen. Pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much for making the time.
Well, thank you. It's a lot of fun to get together and be able to talk about this stuff.
Exactly. Jared, good morning, Mr. Novack, as we used to joke.
Yes, good morning, or good evening, Mr. Novack.
Exactly. Lukas, great to have you here as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so this is first time I'm recording with two guests. I'm a little bit nervous how to manage it. So everything bad is on this humble host. So maybe let's start with introducing yourself. From my left to right, Jared, Lukas, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. So I'm Jared Novack. I am co-founder over at an agency called Upstatement here in the US. But most relevant to today's discussion, also started the Timber project about 10 years ago now, maybe 11. 11 years ago, which is a tool for WordPress, which I collaborate on with Lukas and many others, and excited to dive into today.
Perfect. Lukas?
Yeah, I'm Lukas Gächter. I live in Switzerland in a small town called Winterthur with my family. And I also own a small design and development agency with a couple of friends. We mostly work for smaller companies and organizations. And we do brand strategy, print and digital design, and a lot of websites. And that's also why we came to use Timber. I started using it back in 2015 and then quickly did my first pull request ever, actually, for Timber. And I started contributing then and have been doing that ever since.
Perfect. We will get to that first pull request in, let's say, due course. But what interests me very, very much is how to agency owners, divided by an ocean. How did you guys started to work together on that project? So I'm very curious about the very start. So, Lukas, you mentioned this. You started using Timber. So maybe Jared, can you explain a little bit more about the reason for creating such a project?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that Lukas also does both programming like I do, but also has to own the agency and kind of be responsible at the end of the day, because that's what really led to Timber's creation, and that was seeing all the ways in which designers and engineers were stuck using WordPress together, and all of the ways that WordPress's theming layer was really preventing good collaboration between people who knew how to build stuff on the back end and then designers who knew obviously the visuals, but also just enough CSS and HTML and JavaScript to get themselves into trouble. Well, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble when you're dealing with PHP directly, and that's what WordPress has you do out of the gate, or with any of the default 2015, 2016 themes and stuff that we were kind of coming up against at the beginning. And why we wanted, I wanted something like Timber to exist, and I was looking for it. I said, certainly someone else has had this problem. Certainly someone else has already done this. And what I found in looking through all of these resources was this amazing templating layer called Twig. And I said, again, this is great. Someone's made this. I'm sure someone has integrated this already with WordPress. The world's most used and comprehensive CMS runs 20, 30, 35% of the internet. Certainly this already exists. And it did, I saw a few sort of like started and then quickly abandoned projects. And then I had that lightning bolt of like, well, when you realize that someone should do this, maybe you are the person who should do it. So that was the thing that sort of led to it getting off the ground, and a lot of like late nights or plane flights or train rides where I tried to like piece those pieces together so that we could really unlock and create a layer that designers and front-end designers could be comfortable in working with HTML and CSS and doing some really, interesting and in some ways even like very complicated sort of like template logic and management, but then also kind of keep that cleanly separated from the PHP layer and what a backend engineer really needs to dive into. So that's where it came from, and that's the thing that really helped unlock kind of a big thing at our agency, where all of a sudden we were able to really streamline that collaboration. And we had great WordPress people, we had great HTML and CSS people, and now they could collaborate through Timber.
All right. And for our listeners, can you dig even more into what Timber is now? Because, this is a 10-year history, 11-year history. I've been digging into, history this 10 years, and coincidentally, you were first because I was curious if this was for the name, the Timber. Was it inspired by that song that was very popular 10 years ago? But I dug into comic history, and you were first before they released their song called Timber as well. But I was curious if this was related. It's not.
No, we beat Kesha and Pitbull by a couple years, but we did play that song at my wedding, which was a lot of fun. So Timber, it's kind of a, looking at Twig, which is the template language that Timber uses. The inspiration was to kind of follow kind of like the Twig, woodland themed naming convention, I guess. So that's where that came from. And where things started in terms of like the code base was very much like, these are Upstatement's needs. These are Jared's needs. It had a lot of ways of connecting PHP and that logic and WordPress to Twig, but also a lot of things that were probably unnecessary. A lot of things with like routes and how you handled paths, a lot of stuff with different sort of utilities and shortcuts, things that Upstatement was building it for, and it really helped us. But then as we started to open it to a wider group, the world over, realized that we had overbuilt it in a lot of places. And actually that's, I think, a big part of what Lukas and other contributors have done, where it's like, how can we streamline this and make it really great at what it's supposed to do? And I think that is really kind of a big underlying philosophy of a version 2.0 that we just released in the last few months.
Exactly, because we started talking about recording this episode when there were plans for 2.0 release. Now it's out in the public for a couple of months. And I'm curious, Lukas, maybe you can answer this. Also, to give us a bigger picture from your perspective, how it started for you. You mentioned that you started using it for your own agency and then started contributing. So I'm curious, why did you got involved? Why did you get involved in this project?
Yeah, well, first. For us, it wasn't really the same reason that we started using Timber. It was not that it was easier to collaborate on projects, because we're such a small agency. It's mostly just one developer working on a project. But because we have so many similar clients, which are small companies, and all these companies have the same needs usually. And we were just thinking like, yeah, we are reinventing the wheel with every theme that we build from a basic starter theme. And so we realized that when we could use Timber, it was just easier to build components that you can reuse. And while also having a code base that feels like it's a little cleaner. Really didn't like that you had everything in a PHP file, and just when looking at it, it was hard to see like what's going on here. So yeah, we also tried to fix that, and Timber was like kind of a revelation. Just worked really well from the beginning, and we started using it in all of our projects, and then actually built kind of a starter package for websites that we built. So in Timber you also have the starter theme, which I guess many developers use to start out a website, but we actually took some kind of that code and then built our own thing, which is also a very good use case for what you can use Timber, I guess. And then if you start using a library, you quickly realize, I also need that, or here's a bug, and I could fix that. So why not do a pull request? Maybe it's going to be accepted. First, I was like really nervous because it was my first pull request ever, and I thought like, I'm gonna have to describe it really well, so that it hopefully gets accepted. But then it was no problem. Just went through, and that motivated me to like, So I realized I can actually introduce changes that I need, so I can also have a say in the project. So just to be able to define something or create something new in it that helps you as a developer in your daily life, but also the thinking that it could also help others. So the motivation that any change you make could help thousands of developers is actually like really nice. Giving back or helping people is actually was quite a motivation for me to contribute. There are a few other reasons why I contribute.
Yeah, because this is one thing is that you started using it, but then you started contributing, and my question, like more broader, would be also why even contribute to any open source? This was for you like, okay, I have this, I'm using this stuff, right? So in my best interest is to fix as much elements within this, because then I will benefit from it. But also, on a more broader scale, let's say, why should you even start thinking about contributing to open source at all? Maybe because there's so much open source written, thousands of people are writing open source, but there are so many times more developers just like using that stuff. And there's that famous picture with blogs, a lot of different huge blogs, commercial blogs of software standing on one very tiny, like a straw of open source, one man show project, let's say, solo developer supporting that open source project for the giants to use that. So this is very famous, like a depiction of how open source software sometimes work. And just maybe for the listeners who are never made that barrier through which you went, like, okay, this is my first pull request, and I am doing it even though I'm stressed. Maybe this prevents some people from doing it. So I this is a very long question, but to shorten it, why should you contribute to open source project?
That's quite a hard question. Maybe, yeah, I won't go and tell anybody, well, you should contribute to open source, because it can be very time consuming, it can be frustrating at times. You're doing it for free. So it's actually like a hobby. So you really have to like to do it. There are cases where like agencies give developers the time to contribute to open source. But yeah, I think it's a big problem of the web industry or the tech industry in general, that so much depends on open source and developers who give the time to work on stuff, and they are not really compensated for that, even though like big companies also. Like the biggest one, like Apple, is relies on libraries that are just free, and I see it a lot in many discussions on GitHub as well, on social media, that this is a big problem, to which I think nobody really has a solution. I can just talk from personal experience what it brought me to contribute. And for me, as a developer who is working in a small agency, for me it opened up a world of to work with others. So after studying, the question for me was, where am I going to work? Am I going to work at as a small agency where I'm also the owner and can decide myself where we're going to go? Or am I going to work in a bigger agency where I maybe have senior developers who help me through my experiences and teach me a lot of things, where the path that I chose was a path where I am mostly for myself when coding. And that was actually kind of nice to be able to just start working with other developers and also putting yourself out there and seeing, where am I with my skills? I still don't think I'm a really good developer. I would say I'm an average developer, but there's just so much more around developing with the project management and stuff, writing documentation and stuff. So that all goes into that. And I think,
So this is actually where I'm going to disagree with you, Lukas. You're definitely not an average developer. And maybe like in 2014, before you got involved, maybe that might have been true. And here's what open source does. And it gives you that feedback. It gives you that experience. It made me for sure a better developer, because you got to think not just about like, okay, here's this thing that I'm making and it's kind of a black box. It's just for me. Maybe someone's going to open it in 3 years from now, but hey, that's 3 years from now. Who cares? Instead, you're making stuff that other people are going to rely upon. Other people are going to scrutinize. Other people are going to make sure that like it doesn't contain glaring sort of like security or memory leaks or other things like that. It changes your mindset. And when, before people would say, oh, you got to do testing, test-driven development and stuff. I said, yeah. Well, look, we got, a dozen websites we got to jam out. We don't have time for that. All of a sudden you realize, oh, this is where test-driven development makes sense. This is how I can include that in a sustainable and sensible way. I need to be able to communicate not just the code. And Lukas, this is a thing that always jumped out about your early contributions, but the why, the how, the considerations, like why I chose path A instead of path B, and which is better, and is path B better, but it's going to take, so much longer or involve so much more risks. Like those are the things in my mind that take someone from an average to an excellent developer is yes, it is the code, but it is all of those surrounding things around the code, the why, the communication, the documentation. And that's something that open source is going to force you into. Whereas if you are working at a small agency or your own shop, you just don't get that structure or feedback. So I think that is just a huge benefit that open source provides to young engineers.
Yeah, it was definitely the case for me.
Me too.
with the example that you said, like, for me it was also a lot of thinking out loud. When I wrote down these lengthy issue descriptions, I mostly just noted down what I was learning about the problem without already finding a solution, and kind of hoping that people jumped in and would help me figure it out as well.
And you take that against what we see a lot in some pull requests where people will say like, hey, good news, I fixed 10,000 lines of code, or tabs to spaces or spaces to tabs or whatever it is, and they give you 2 sentences and you're like, what can I do with this? And the ability, and maybe it is a natural ability that you have or something you developed, to kind of like put your thinking out there in the message and allow others to sort of like not just see the end result, but see the thinking and the questions that sort of brought you to that solution. That is valuable, not just on GitHub, but in so many sort of like engineering conversations that happen between different, senior or principal level engineers, where they're trying to figure out some really fundamental and important questions that could guide sort of the technical architecture for a long time for a particular product or company. Those discussions and being able to be confident and comfortable, sort of like both putting yourself out there, but also the humility to listen and the humility to recognize, oh, I was totally wrong about that, and this other person has a much better idea. That takes a communication muscle, and open source is going to help you develop that, especially because so much of what we have to do, and I say we, and of course you guys are the ones who actually have to do it, not this dumb American. You're translating that across language and culture sometimes.
I think there is also another component which is obvious in this discussion, but it's all written communication, which is missing now, maybe not so much missing in the remote era, in the era of remote work, where so much more is done in written form. But before COVID, everyone worked from most of people worked from the office, and those were just discussion, live discussions on meeting and so on. But when you have to explain the problem you encountered in a way and in a fashion that is understandable after first reading, it's totally different game of communicating clearly and coherently, so that other contributors will understand and will want to read this and follow through and so on. And this is no mental shortcuts and stuff, and this makes it totally different way of communicating that polishing, let's say, on an open source project done in a free time. So I can spend as much time as I want because it's my free time. So changes the way you also work in your workplace, because you hone that skill of writing in a clear way so that you are understood after the first reading.
Yeah, that's surely one thing I always strive for. The thing about written communication is also really nice. I realized, like, we are now talking about problems that we also talked about 5 years ago. And I remember we talked about them. So, but when I say talk, like, yeah, we wrote about them in buried somewhere in a pull request or an issue. And I oftentimes just search for some keywords and try to find that discussion. And that really helps. Like, you have a really long trail of history in that GitHub repository, and I think it prevents you from doing too many loops over certain topics. But like, maybe it's difficult if new contributors come in, then they just see the current code base, and they have to rely on somebody that knows a little bit about where we have come from and what problems we encountered along the way.
Yeah, it makes me think, Lucas, when you were kind of talking earlier about why Timber and stuff and the organization that it promotes in regards to like having like well-structured themes instead of these messy PHP files. And at one level, you could think like, okay, that's just aesthetic. Who cares? But what you're getting to is why it really matters, because when you're trying to maintain business critical code bases over a period of years, being able to have smart organization and kind of like a paper trail of decisions. Why is this organized like this? How did we decide? Why did we decide that? So that 2 years later, someone doesn't spend 3 weeks of their time digging a hole that someone already dug and then patched over. Those are some of the big architectural challenges that organizations now have, because unlike even just 5 or 10 years ago, it's like, I don't know, we have a website, we have an app, who cares? It's cool. Now it's like, oh no, your business is that app. Your business is that product, that website. So it makes a lot of sense to invest and spend money to have really great organization and have really great sustainability in there, so that the reasons, the decisions, and so forth can be well architected. And therefore, you spend your time not redigging the same holes, but rather, maybe not digging new holes, but you're actually building something. And that's what good technical architecture allows for and promotes, and why you have to be kind of like a great or excellent to great developer or engineer to start to have a meaningful impact. And again, that is just an escalator that you can take with open source, as opposed to trying to do it on the job, where the stakes are very different, the eyes are very different, and the amount of permission that you might have to grow or to fail is going to be much more limited, because it is on someone else's dime.
I have a feeling it's somewhere between the lines is that you are taking over some parts of the project in a way you want to. So you are not asking for permission. You are doing this, and with your pull request, you are making it happen. And then, okay, the review kicks in and everything. But you have some kind of a like real influence over a piece of code that will influence then those thousands of other developers. So I think this is amazing. And I wanted to go back a little bit in history, Jared, to you. So we know why to contribute to a project, but why do you open source something that can be your competitive advantage as a company? Because this started within your agency, and this is a business decision to open source this.
Mm-hmm.
So why?
Well, number one, it is amazing to get free contributions to your work from all over
Fair enough.
the world. So
Fair
that's
enough.
the reason. Let me give you a real story, which is that we were bidding on a project, and the client was interviewing us, and they said, okay, we're talking to this other agency. They recommend that we use this WordPress system called Timber. Is that something that you would also recommend or you also use? And I said, well, as it so happens, we actually wrote that library and maintain it here at Upstatement. And that was kind of the end of that conversation, and we got that job. So you're able to establish a authority for yourself, because now it isn't just some sort of secret proprietary sauce that you sprinkle on in the back end, but it can become a part of the kind of technical vocabulary that people might have or they're evaluating. Further, when we go in to meetings sometimes and we're having to talk about our technical approach, we will often, assuming that is what we recommend for that project, talk about Timber, talk about how we've used it. But then we also have the other validation that says, let me give you a list of some of the other agencies that you might be familiar with who also use it. Let me give you a list of other organizations who use it. And we're able to rattle off top universities, tech companies. Here, President Obama's foundation uses it on their website. So we list these kind of big headline names. Some of them might be from the Upstatement portfolio, but we're able to sort of scale the Upstatement portfolio. And any agency that uses it and we're able to kind of like peek into the code and figure it out, that becomes a feather in our cap to go through and say, hey, it's good enough for President Obama. We hope it's good enough for your organization.
I love it. I love it. It's a success story, I would say. But building on what you said, that a lot of it takes, I don't know, a grit or a lot of effort to maintain a project over many years, and there is so many projects that appear and then disappear or just get abandoned. So, what makes you, or what makes a good open source project? Why? Because if you are going to invest some of your free time instead of running, cycling, whatever you code for free somewhere, something, how to choose a project that you want to contribute to, because then you might end up in contributing to at the very early stage, which is very like rewarding, that you built part of the initial framework. But then if it gets not if it goes nowhere, this is a sad feeling, I guess.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Results not guaranteed, and I would say that like this is where Timber's contribution community makes all the difference. If it was still just a one-man show, so to speak, if it was just an Upstatement only thing, Timber would be long gone and into the past. What I think you're trying to do, both as a maintainer and a contributor, is to create that virtuous cycle. And that's easier said than done, but making sure that, from kind of like the origination end, I am not too precious about sort of like where things go, because the truth is, Lucas, Eric, Nicholas, others who are working with Timber just as much and now far more than I am, have a better read on the current landscape and being able to let go of some of the things that I thought might have been important. And maybe they were important in 2014, but we're not in 2014 anymore. We're in 2024. So I think the difference is you have to either A, decide that I am optimizing it for the current point in time, or I'm optimizing it for something broader. And if you choose that, you're also choosing to sort of let go a little bit and allow things to take form and to take shape with what the current technology landscape demands. I don't know, Lucas, you're confronting this much more. I'm interested kind of like what you see as the difference maker there. I guess the difference between sort of like we were talking about, what's the difference between that dead end thing that someone puts on GitHub and it seems like the new hotness for a month or two, and then you check back a year later and it says, this repo has been archived, please use blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I think, if a project hits some kind of threshold where enough people are using it, then maybe it's hard to kill. if it's not evolving in a way where it's something completely different a couple of years later. But I think, some of the things you really have to care about are, it's not like just updates to the code itself, but also, for example, documentation. You always need to be aware, or to really care about that everything that you do and that what you change is documented. We also have a lot of inputs from the community through issues, or for example through Stack Overflow. We ask people to ask Timber support questions through Stack Overflow, and I read through a lot of those, and so you start to get a feeling for what people actually need or how they are using it, and also where the parts are that they don't really get yet. And then you can start working on these type of things. Like one example is that I realized that there's because Timber grew how it grew, because Chad, you added things that you needed on the way. There were a lot of inconsistencies around function names, for example. This isn't something that you anticipate if you start writing a library, but then you start to see like, okay, well, here's a problem, and you don't see this problem through reading one issue. This is a kind of problem that only emerges if you read hundreds of issues and maybe 200 questions on Stack Overflow. You start to see patterns, underlying patterns, and I think, yeah, this is then the interesting thing to solve. Like, it doesn't. It's not about singular features. Like, okay, I want to have this feature, but I actually want to make it. I want to change the project in a way where it's still usable and understandable when it's evolved. It's hard to describe that. I mean, like, yeah. One example is that is actually why we introduced Timber 2, or why we had to use a next major version, because there were so many underlying issues that we wanted to solve, that I think if we didn't do that, it would just not work in the future, and the project would come to an end at some time.
With open source, the approach is the community builds stuff de facto for themselves a little bit, right? This started as a project to streamline the work at the agency, and I'm comparing this to product companies that are building for their customers, trying to figure out product market fit, not always managing to do this. And what's your opinion? Because it came to my mind that these are totally opposite ways of building software. You build a SaaS platform or a product company, and you are figuring out features for your customers, and then you test it. Versus with open source, you are building this for yourself, but such software can also grow to a very considerable sizes, or even create companies, WordPress, for example, or Automatic, right? Or other huge organizations based on open source software. So my question to you is, how would you, like, in your opinion, how would you compare building software for open source software versus products for customers? And on top of it, do you also see any similar problems that you keep on building and building and building stuff that is unnecessary or not entirely required, or just requires in 1% of cases, and it's a waste of time on this particular feature?
Well, I'm not so sure that they are all that different. I mean, you mentioned how it's a difference between building something for yourself or building something for a customer. A lot of software that we use actually was in this in-between zone. Like Slack famously, I think, began as a internal messaging tool built by a company that was trying to develop some sort of like video game. And they were like, well, we need, just to kind of keep all our video game developers kind of in sync, we need to make this little internal messaging thing. And then little by little, they realized, wait a second, this internal messaging thing, that's the thing. And they kind of kept following that thread. And what's powerful there is the idea that when you are the customer, and it just so happens that there are a million, or who knows, billion other people just like you out there, wow, that gives you a real advantage, because now you can go through those cycles really quick, because you can say, does this help me in terms of what I am trying to do, in terms of being in an office or in a development group, versus having to rely on surveys, focus groups, other sorts of user testing, which is sometimes necessary, but it just slows down that process. In open source, you get to kind of start from that ideal spot of like, yes, you are a customer, so to speak, and there are going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of other customers just like you out there. And the more your solution is actually solving your problem, and the more your problem is similar to the problems that others have, well, then you're really going to find that product market fit. Of course, there are a million markets out there that are like, well, those people aren't developers or they don't use, intra-company messaging services, so it doesn't quite work. But it's all about that idea of like trying to shift, where is that customer? Because the more you can internalize that customer through you being them or having great data, great surveys, great analytics, that's where you can kind of get into that cycle super, super quick.
But don't you get into that trap of building more, or is it like because you are doing this for yourself, you are so careful about your free time because you are doing this most of the time during your free time, so you are very careful about what you are spending time on, so you naturally avoid any like building traps for stuff that will never be used.
Oh, I'd say you naturally build that stuff. You naturally do build the traps. You naturally do kind of like get into the things. I mean, all the mistakes that you highlighted, Lucas, in terms of like it being very upstatement and Jared centric at first, that is a part of, my growth and learning that it's like you can be overfit to a particular market or a particular customer. Because I'm sure when you first looked at Timber, it's like there were parts that were really useful and there were parts that were like, okay, that is solving a very specific problem for one or two very specific people and trying to balance those two. And, I learned a lot from watching Lucas and others sort of like take things apart and say, ooh, that's not a normal customer, or for us, we need to kind of like better segment that out or recognize that this thing that we have built is not as good as this thing that already exists. So let's separate those two, focus on the thing that we are really great at. And I think that is just a lesson also of like SaaS software, where the software that tries to do too much and be all things to one customer or all things to all people, that tends to stumble and fail, and sometimes spectacularly and very expensively. Whereas products that are able to really discipline themselves and have the confidence to say, I know what my customer is, I know what they need to do, I know also where I am going to kind of create some like hard lines and not go further. Very similar problems. Sometimes it is solved with a SaaS user interface. Sometimes it's solved with JavaScript and PHP and other code that makes some kind of opinionated choices about what we're going to do and what we're not.
Yeah, I wrote in one newsletter that riches are in the niches or something like this. So that this very, very narrow area of expertise for an agency, for example, or for the product is the competitive advantage of knowing so much and knowing so the problem on such a deep level that you are, I don't know, not maybe unbeatable, but at least you have very, very good fit for your ideal customer.
I'd also say that like for a SaaS, when they build a product, they start to add these small features that help the customers. But for us as an open source open source project, I think we're more like a platform to help developers build those features. So that's what we tried to do recently, to remove some features that were there. Jared mentioned it, like stuff that was made sense for very edge case scenarios, but wouldn't make sense for a lot of developers. We started to try to remove these cases and move into a direction where it's more like, oh, you want to build this feature? Yeah, like you can use this and that as a base for it, but maybe we won't give you the complete solution. So in a way, I'd say it's more like a platform on which you build your own product. So in that sense, it's also a little different.
Well, let me just hard disagree with you again, Lucas, perhaps.
Okay.
Where some of the most successful SaaS software that we see becomes that platform, right? It's like let's take YouTube, for example. Is YouTube like a piece of SaaS or is it a platform? And this is a trend you see in so many other places where it's like it tries to do something, but then they've invested a lot of space in figuring out how an ecosystem can be created in a platform, the ways in which content creators can be a part of something, a way in which data can be exported and interact with everything from Zapier to data warehouses and things like that, like trying to recognize the ways in which a piece of SaaS software is much more powerful when it actually recognizes that it is a part of a larger ecosystem and it's able to, use embeds and other sorts of like ways of trading information back and forth to become an integral part of an individual or company's practices. So I see the differences, but I also see that these things are becoming more and more intertwined, and there are ways, lessons from software and open source communities that SaaS can adopt, and vice versa.
Sure. I can also see that now.
Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. You're so full of BS on that one, Jared. You're just trying to make a mountain out of that.
It's just all like evolving in waves and circles and loops and
Speaking of evolving, I would like to get back also to that 2.0 release, because this is like a major, I don't know, breakthrough. For some reason, you decided to change that leading version from 1 to 2. So what was your, I don't know, planning process? Why did you decide to take this action? Just also from like a architectural or planning or growing a piece of software. Why would you do this as a 2.0 instead of yet another, I don't know, minor revision?
Right. Well, I'll start this one, which is to say that, like, I think with our, there came a point where we knew that like breaking changes would be necessary. As much as we want to honor the idea of deprecation and allowing for backwards compatibility, at some point you kind of have to make a choice that we encountered. That it's like there is some stuff here that is just fundamentally in conflict with how it should be, and really putting a stake in the ground and saying like, okay, this is where we're going to require that people who want to go with us on the next stage also might have to change some things that were overly edge case or were sort of a quirk of decisions or code back from the 20 teens or whatever to where we are today. Now, how we got there was definitely a long road. And Lukas, you're probably best to speak to some of those really significant changes and why they have such an impact on development today.
Yeah, I can definitely talk a lot about Timber 2 because it took such a long time to get there. It was also a learning that we had, like because we're working on an open source project, and it's not like just a website you do for a client that you're going to update. There's so many things you have to consider, and there's so many details that you need to get right. And I guess we completely underestimated that a couple of times. So
in a row.
Yeah.
There's that saying that 95% of the project takes 95% of the time, and the remaining 5% of the time of the work takes the remaining 95% of the time. Yeah. Something like to that effect.
We felt that for sure, right?
Yeah. We had a lot of moments where we said, "Oh yeah, 2.0 is just around the corner," and then and then so many more issues and problems popped up that we knew we're gonna have to fix that before a 2.0 release. And then we also started to be more open to breaking changes then. So we said like, oh, this is also an area that we have to touch. So let's think about how we could improve it so that it's not gonna be a problem in a year or two. And so what we really tried to do was to introduce a lot of breaking changes now that are going to be necessary to have a good base to work in the future. So I guess 2.0 is all about making things more consistent. This is something that we already talked about, like the functions that you actually use, how they are named, how these functions work across different types of, for example, posts or taxonomies or users or comments in WordPress. How you can access different parts of these functionality in Timber. We made that more consistent, or try to do it. That's always one thing that was a goal of mine, to make the API understandable and usable. So that was always kind of the first approach that I took. Like how should it look like if I, as a developer, if I'm going to use it, and then start to think about, okay, what do we have to do in the back to get it working. And it should work not only for more experienced developers who are very proficient in the MVC pattern and PHP coding patterns. It also has to work for developers who are more on an entry level, who maybe just discovered WordPress theming and also discovered Timber and then tried to make it work, and maybe it's even their first website coding project. So we also try to consider that it should work for different skill levels. And then, yeah, of course, it should also work for more experienced developers. And these developers, they want to extend Timber with different coding patterns. And we also did a lot under the hood to make it possible to extend Timber in a way that that's common in PHP development, I'd say.
All right, but what was the most difficult part here? Is it developing that courage to start breaking things, meaning it wouldn't be backwards compatible, and you had to spend some time on it, developing that muscle to finally make a decision. This will be 2.0 because we will break so many things that this is totally different library, let's say.
Yeah. I'd say in some way the hardest part was knowing when to stop breaking things.
All right. Yeah. That building trap, right?
Yeah. Because it's like you like Lucas is kind of saying, well, we don't want to put users through this constant cycle where every 6 months it's like the thing that you were used to gets kind of ripped out from underneath them. You want to say, okay, we're kind of resetting the table and doing that once. And towards the end, it was like, oh, but this one thing, we just noticed or just remembered, and oh, geez, it would only take, one last pull request, give me one more. And we at some point just said, nope, that's going to be 3.0 or that's going to be 2.1 or 2.5 or whatever. Like we just had to kind of say like, the number of rooms in the house that we are renovating is extensive enough. And we accept that 2.0 is not going to solve every single problem or every second level problem, but this is where we are stopping, and we're going to make that really good. We're going to keep that commitment, but also we're going to make sure that there is now momentum to go forward and say that is going to happen in 2.1 or 2.2 or 3.0 and stuff. Because I think the other risk is that you say, well, I need to now wait until it's perfect. And I think this is where we did get ourselves caught, where that becomes a very sort of like delayed and pregnant big version, and it's just forever waiting because it's one more thing. It's the classic issue of scope creep, and being able to put out something that is really good and accepting that it's not perfect. And indeed, few things in this world have ever been.
Mhm. Yeah, and then your users have to catch up on so many elements. The bigger the bigger the amount of changes, the more they have to learn. This is like a learning curve for them, barrier of entry for the old ones. New ones will get this. They don't know about anything about previous versions, but those that have to switch, it's the more they have to change, the more it's more difficult for them.
Right. And that's also where you need the feedback as a developer around like, actually, even if what I would have done before I thought was perfect, based on the feedback that we're getting from the community, it turns out we did something that is not perfect. And we need to go back and re-examine or rethink something that, hey, we thought we had kind of checked this off the list, but actually there are some issues. And I think that's where you need that humility with your community to say, we're putting something out there and we do really want to learn from what is working out in the world, what is not, so we can come back and make it sharper and better in the next cycle.
And so, speaking about this, did you worsen any areas of the library? Because the intention is we are getting better on every front, but was it also the case that you made some areas even worse? Not even just worse. Like did your community like screamed at you? I want this reverted immediately.
Some things we did in terms of how Timber can be extended. We did it in a way that was too strict. Maybe we wanted to cater to tools like PHP Stan, who can show you a lot of issues through static analysis of the code, and sometimes, yeah, we followed a couple of suggestions it had, and then there came some developers who said like, oh yeah, this isn't going to work for me, and then we circled back actually on these ones, and I think we're still waiting for feedback because a lot of developers still have to do the update. But I guess in general, I hope nothing is like worse now. A lot of the things are different, and maybe you have to rewrite things in your own code base, and can also be a lot of work if you have more advanced patterns that you use in your theme, and sometimes it's not going to be easy.
And
This is
I think your point there brings up that question, though, right? What is better and what is worse? You chase like the higher PHP Stan score because you think that is like, well, look, that is a standard and objective thing. I want the biggest number possible, the fewest number of issues possible. Well, you just create problems kind of in the real world. So I think it is all about sort of figuring out like what is that balance between sort of like, better or worse or perfection versus what people actually are using or encountering or need in their workflow. And unfortunately, that's an area that requires a lot of like wisdom and judgment to sort of make those determinations. And Lucas, I remember that issue now where it was about like, are you referring to the final, what do you call it, declaration? And it's like, yeah, that totally made sense. That would be a way that kind of like would keep things better, strict and governed. But then that's exactly the frustration that I used to have with WordPress in different places where it's like, just let me code, man. Like I can do it. Trust me, I will take on that risk. And it's all about sort of like figuring out where you want to kind of like hit things, perfect, so to speak, but also where you're going to make some really sort of like smart or hopefully smart considered compromises that say this is what we need to do to differentiate how we believe our product should be used.
Like chasing, for example, 100 score on PageSpeed Insights.
Yeah, it feels good, right? But
exactly.
Actually, I've yet to see a trophy show up at anyone's house or a giant check that says, "Oh my God, you've got 100%, code coverage or anything like that, or A+ code score." It's like those are good things to watch because you don't want to do things that are just like dumb. But I think the wisdom is sometimes knowing that it's like am I chasing the right thing here? And that takes a little bit of like gumption to step back and be like, oh yeah, um, that's not the right thing to be chasing right now.
Mhm. And do you guys have any other, let's say, learnings and findings from the process? We talked about that perfectionism, right? Or chasing that chasing for the sake of chasing instead of, let's say, sometimes, let's say, solving. But what else brings to your mind when thinking about learnings from the whole process across 11 years now?
Yeah. To me, one of the biggest things that I have learned is, uh, talking about, the not perfection. The first version of Timber was objectively terrible. Like, just, you know, fundamental errors in terms of like how things should be structured. But it was through that process that it was able to sort of like find some users who pointed that out for me. And now we're talking like, 2013 era before Lucas, you even got to the scene to be like, what on earth are you doing, man? And having that pointed out was so valuable. Whereas if we had kept that stuff completely in-house, completely proprietary, completely secret, we would still be making the mistakes of 2013 10 or 11 years later. And what a total tragedy. So it's about sort of like putting things out there, learning. There've been different sort of like complementary packages and stuff that we / Upstatement / Timber has put out over the years, some of which have really found sort of like a zone, and others have been like, yep, that has not been updated since 2017 and no one cares.
All right. Lucas, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, for me, it just I just learned so much. Actually, it made me a better developer. I learned stuff like test-driven development through Timber, or actually started to apply it. And when I look at how I started out contributing, I think I'm a person who wants to do right by everybody. Like I want to cater to everybody, so everybody's happy. But then I had to realize, yeah, this is also not going to be possible. Like you have to take decisions on what issues you're going to work on and what you're going to accept to be included in the code base. And oftentimes it's you just have to say no, which I can do better in the meantime. At the beginning it was much harder for me. Yeah, but I think there's also some other people in the project that helped me get through this.
Mm-hmm.
Others who said like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't add that, and then yeah, you have to be humble enough to reconsider and maybe sleep 1 or 2 nights more over it, and then think about, yeah, there's so many ways in which Timber can be used, and sometimes you make assumptions and they are wrong, and you get corrected, and yeah, you start to try to accept them and be humble about it.
And people the users are not softening the blow, I guess, or are they? Because this is like open source community. So what kind of feedback do you get if you, I don't know, worsen the things? Is it like the blow is softened, or is it not really?
Yeah, 95% of people, I think, are just like, wonderful humans out there
All
that
right.
want to help. And then occasionally, and it's really occasionally, sometimes you're just like, why did you say that? Like, that's mean. Like what's
All
your
right.
problem, And, but, the vast majority of people are just like, just wonderful and understanding users, collaborators, downloaders, testers, triers, and people I think are fundamentally like, on your side, and they're there to like help and try and make things better. And, again, I can count on maybe one and a half hands the number of negative interactions I've kind of directly experienced. For the most part, it really is just rewarding and supporting.
Big shout out to the community. That's it's really nice from all of you that you're just so understanding and nice to us.
Totally. We've got 100+ people who have, official code commits in the Timber repo. And I would guess 5 times as many people who have submitted comments, questions, etc., through GitHub issues or pull requests. And at the same time, like when the pull requests come through and it's like, hey, this is a really good idea, but it's just not for us. I can't think of any time anyone has ever freaked out and said, you have no idea what you're missing. This is the most, people are like, okay, cool. I get it. Like, I'm going to, either A, try something else, or B, maybe this is the perfect thing for my own sort of like personal layer or kind of proprietary library. And that's where a lot of other tools have been born that sort of take Timber and go to the next level and say, how can we make this a more specific form-fitting thing for our particular client set or agency? And again, it's people are generally like really smart, really understanding, and all looking toward to build the best possible pieces out there.
That's great. This is I think if it would be the other way around, that wouldn't be so rewarding to work on, or would scare people off. All right. So before we wrap up, what's on the roadmap for 3.0? Let's say.
This is like
roughly.
Yeah, that's like asking a woman right after she's given birth, like, well, when's the next kid coming?
Okay.
I'll empathize with a little bit. I mean, from my end, what actually I want to focus on is the rhythm that we get into, not for 3.0, but for 2.1 and 2.2 and that sort of rhythm, because I really want to learn from the mistakes of like waiting for this big giant release that's going to fix all our problems, and instead closing that cycle and saying, what can we do in the next 3 to 6 months to address the most relevant issues and the most important new use cases that have developed, zero in on those, focus, release something, get that feedback, and then learn, rinse and repeat. So that is to say, we're going to focus on raising this kid, I think, before the next one. What do you think, Lucas? Am I wrong there? What are your big dreams right now?
Yeah, well, if you talk about Timber 3.0, maybe you think like, oh, it's going to be a completely different thing again. But I guess it's not. We're not going to reinvent the wheel, but we want to focus more on getting things even more stable and ready for the future. There are updates coming to PHP, to WordPress, where we have to stay compatible, and we are trying to do that in a way that that's going to work for developers. One thing that we try to work on, which is maybe an area in itself, is image manipulation, like the whole area about how you can work with images in Timber is probably going to get an update. There are some very nice ideas out there for how to make it even easier to apply different manipulations to images, be it resizing, be it converting it to different image formats, and also like handling all the files that Timber generates. That's also one topic that we want to focus on. I think we're going to add more strict types, which means like the language in PHP with the last versions, it evolved in a way that it allows you to add more types to classes, functions, parameters, so that you get more errors if you if you have a wrong type that you input into a function. This is something that makes code base much more reliable, and I think we're striving towards that. And one quote that I always come up with again, which is actually by you, Jared. You said that in another podcast, is that Timber tries to get out of the way. So maybe we're going to see some changes where we're going to remove some parts of Timber and add a library instead, or tell you, like, you can use this or this library to actually get to the same result, which is going to make it easier for us to maintain the code if we don't have to maintain every single feature that Timber provides.
Yeah. And this is very humble. Very humble statement.
Well, that goes back to, Lukas, what you said earlier today. It's, that platform mindset and being able to create a space that you can make it easier to mix and match and pull in all these different things while trusting that developers know what they need. And we want to support and help them get there, do so in a way that has a certain sort of logic that everyone is like aligned with, but then recognize that like the best stuff has still yet to be built. And we want to make sure that things are open enough so that you're not running into walls that we've built, but rather roads that we've paved.
Nice.
Write that down.
Yeah. It's all recorded.
Yes.
Another quote. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for the recording. It was great conversation. Thank you very much. This is also for us, at Osom, we use Timber, right? That's why that's why this is so interesting to me and for the team. So thanks again, and take care. All the best in 2024. It's very early January, so I guess I can say that.
Definitely, it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for bringing us together.
Pleasure is all.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.
If you like what you've just heard, don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. On the other hand, if you've got a question we haven't answered yet, feel free to reach out to us directly. Just go to osomstudio.com/contact. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next episode of the Osom to Know podcast.